Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Koo, and I'll be doing my presentation on the book club for How to Survive a Plaque by David France. This chapter, I will be talking about the old days from pages 485 to 510. So the first slide is about the questions I'll be discussing about what is the health-related policies do you see impacting the story in this chapter, who are the key players and stakeholders in this chapter, what is one lesson for health policy advocates in this chapter, what is one policy tension you see represented, what resonates with you from this chapter with either the COVID-19 pandemic or another current health policy issue you are following or you're discussing in class. And the last question is anything else interesting you would like to mention or a resource you would like to share. So I'll be talking about the health-related policies I saw that impacted the story in this chapter. The first health-related policy I found that impacted the story is the FDA Accelerated Approval and Early Access Policy. This policy allows for a faster approval of drugs for serious conditions that are urgent, such as the Roche's Sequinavir. Due to the urgency of the AIDS crisis in the book and the need for solution, I believe there were controversial FDA policy shifts toward accelerated approval pathways for life-threatening diseases. This allowed to use drugs like Sequinavir, even though there was only a limited clinical time and data. It offered dying patients to recover again, but it was a risk of using potentially ineffective drugs into a large population. In the book, the Sequinavir was used throughout 15,000 patients and it only offered temporary relief for about 16 weeks and risked developing resistance to better treatments that were still in development. The first new compound in years came before the panel called D4T. It was a drug that was another reverse transcriptase inhibitor like AZT, DDI, and DDC. The Bristol Myers Squibb company tested it thoroughly, and more than 10,000 patients have been on D4T for 18 months. The company called an early hearing at the FDA requesting permission in May 1994 to halt the study and rush the drug to the market. This caused Gonzalez to be worried about making the same mistake with AZT. The policy was created from activist pressure, especially from ACT, UUP, and TAG, but had unintended consequences like the first approved protease inhibitor only had some benefits. This health policy impacts the story because in the public health field, it is difficult to balance urgency and evidence, especially in a crisis. In this case, it provided hope, but the results didn't last long, and some of the rush drugs caused more harm than good. The second health-related policy I found is patient-centered clinic trust policy. Spencer Cox work influenced how trials were structured and insisting they enroll the sickest patients first, include placebo arms, and measure actual survival rather than just biological markers like viral load. Spencer Cox also helped reform trial designs to ensure that trials allowed open-label drug combinations reflecting the real-world treatment. The last health-related policy I found is health communication transparency or equity policies. The book talks about how community meetings, like the one organized by Jules Levin at NYU, demonstrates the need for open communication and channel between scientists, pharmaceuticals, and patients. Transparency, accountability, and the access to treatment should be informed to the public and patients, not only in trials. This shows that there is a gap in health communication policy where the infected community became its own existing public health department. So there are multiple key players and stakeholders in this chapter, such as the activists and patients. Spencer Cox is one of the key players. I believe he is an advocate, and he designed the clinical trial models and protocol designs showing how the trial could work and focus on ill patients first. I thought of him as an advocate because in the book it says, "Tears filled Spencer Cox's eyes. We did it. We are going to live." So to me, this symbolized advocacy. Mark Harrington is one of the TAG members. Richard Berkowitz is a patient who recovered from advanced AIDS symptoms. The key stakeholders included pharmaceutical companies such as Merck, Abbott, Roche. Dr. Joseph Solomon is a clinician and an early HIV researcher. Jules Levin is a member from Brooklyn and a straight man with AIDS. The last key stakeholders in the community is the infected community with AIDS. This includes thousands of gay men, activists, and patients. So one lesson I learned for health policy advocates in this chapter is that community-informed policy advocates can save lives. This chapter showed that it is essential to inform those who are infected the most by any health crisis with an effective and ethical health policy. It also shows how advocacy based on live experience, such as the AIDS crisis or even COVID-19, can change institutional behavior and policy outcomes. Spencer Cox had a strong advocacy, and he learned and worked with trial designs for the AIDS crisis and showed ethical and successful results. Another lesson from this chapter is instead of complaining about AIDS, Cox and the TAG team helped design clinical trials to help find a solution. This just shows that no one is going to save you if you don't do anything about it, and the communities need to work together and build their own policy responses when the system fails. One policy tension I saw in this chapter is urgency versus evidence, the tension between urgent access to treatments and FDA scientific standards to ensure safety and efficacy. This showed tension in the health crisis such as the AIDS crisis and the COVID-19 that both needed vaccine/drugs rollouts and early treatment approvals. The push to urgently release sequinavir, even when the limited and short-lived efficacy shows how desperation and political pressure can lead to underwhelming interventions that potentially can cause more danger than harm. I also thought the policy tension showed how the urgency of the AIDS crisis started a type of culture or perspective to release it now, study it later. Sequinavir early approval gave false hope that ruined trust from the public, but without the early approval, many people would have died waiting for approved and perfect solutions. So what resonates with you from this chapter with either the COVID-19 pandemic or another current health policy issue you are following or we are discussing in class? In this chapter, the AIDS crisis and how there were test trials, urgency to create a cure, and the risk of using these short-lived efficacy vaccines were just like how COVID-19 was. In both of these health crises, there were emotional and social toll of waiting for a cure, and many people's lives are endangered. It reminded me watching the news of COVID-19, and many people were losing friends and loved ones, similar to reading this chapter of the AIDS crisis. This chapter resonates with COVID-19 because it talked about the Lazarus effect. It showed how vaccines change outcomes in the AIDS crisis, just like how COVID-19 did. A quote from the book was, they're not a cure, we don't know what they are in effect, but this is the first major piece of good news we have in all these years. They're calling it the Lazarus effect. And it reminded me of the COVID-19 pandemic when they first found a cure like mRNA. Both of these pandemics caused the communities to face uncertain data, changing recommendations, false hope, destroying trust, and emotional exhaustion. Both AIDS and COVID-19 crises reflect how science, policy, and advocates connect and cross with each other. Anything else interesting you would like to mention or a resource you would like to share? So the resource that I found was famous American actor Charlie Sheen. He played in movies such as Wall Street and Two and a Half Men and other movies. So Charlie Sheen reviewed he had been HIV positive in 2015 and talks about how he has headaches that felt like brain tumor. I thought this was interesting because I know one of our fellow classmates shared a link about another famous celebrity of Magic Johnson, and it's kind of like this. He got interviewed in this YouTube video. I also provided it into the discussion forum. So he just talks about his HIV, and he talks very honestly about how he deals with it. And it's a good video to watch to see how people deal with HIV and how it affects them. So very good video to watch. And thank you all for watching my presentation on the chapter of Old Days.